Xenosystems Fragments. Libertarianism for Zombies. Nickland. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Libertarian isn't a word that's been heard much recently. Whilst aesthetics is surely part of the explanation, there's probably more to it than that. Most obviously, recent political developments in the United States have shown, beyond the slightest possibility of doubt, that modern liberalism and the project of maximal state expansion are so completely indistinguishable that liberal libertarian fusionism can only perform a comedy act. Darren K. Hovhanessian had already predicted this outcome down to its minute details before the 2008 presidential election. Ed Kilgore later conducted a complimentary dismissal from the left. From reason came the question: is libertarianism dead? Or was it ever alive in the first place? Which sets us out on a zombie hunt. Anybody here who has poked into this stuff, even just a little bit, is probably approaching shriek point already. In the name of everything holy, please just let it remain in its grave. It's too late for that. Libertarianism has been freshly exhumed specially for outside-in readers, and the zombie serum injected through its left eye, directly into the amygdala. It might seem rather ghoulish, but let us harden ourselves, for science. This absurd shambling specimen will help us to refine an elegant formula, of both ideological and historical interest. Brink Lindsay offered the authoritative account. Today's ideological turmoil, however, has created an opening for ideological renewal, specifically liberalism's renewal as a vital governing philosophy. A refashioned liberalism that incorporated key libertarian concerns and insights could make possible a truly progressive politics, once again not progressive in the sense of hewing to a particular set of pre-existing left-wing commitments, but rather in the sense of attuning itself to the objective dynamics of U.S. social development. In other words, a politics that joins together under one banner the causes of both cultural and economic progress. Conservative fusionism, the defining ideology of the American right for a half-century, was premised on the idea that libertarian policies and traditional values are complementary goods. That idea still retains at least an intermittent plausibility, for example, in the case for school choice as providing a refuge for socially conservative families. But an honest survey of the past half-century shows a much better match between libertarian means and progressive ends. Most obviously, many of the great libertarian breakthroughs of the era: the fall of Jim Crow, the end of censorship, the legalization of abortion, the liberalization of divorce laws, the increased protection of the rights of the accused, the reopening of immigration, were championed by the political left. Libertarian means and progressive ends. Could it imaginably be said more clearly? Liberty is legitimate if, and only if, it serves to promote the consolidation of the cathedral, through chaotic multicultural criminality, which is then retrospectively interpreted as the intrinsic telos of freedom. Whatever does not subordinate itself to this agenda is to have its brains eaten, and be systematically recycled into progressive zombie flesh. This is a project for libertarian hipsters and Leviathan apparatchiks to undertake hand in hand, fusionally. The new age of the cannibal has come. Neo-reactionaries are libertarians mugged by reality, to adapt a pre-coined phrase. This piece of socio-cultural understanding appears to be generally accepted, and rightly so. If it needs defending, that will have to happen elsewhere, but I have yet to see it seriously contested. Moldbug's own intellectual pedigree suffices to establish the claim on a solid foundation, but it is, in any case, far from aberrant in this regard. The recognition that libertarian ideas, despite their philosophical elegance and economic attractiveness, are not historically or politically realistic, has been the catalytic insight driving the development and adoption of neo-reactionary alternatives, shorn of certain mythical elements inherited by the progressive clade, substantial egalitarianism most prominently. This is an empirically robust, uncontroversial story, but it is not yet a formula. It's time to take the next step. Long live, strike that, last, science. Has there yet emerged a neo-reactionary who was once a libertarian? This isn't a question designed to embarrass anybody. I just think the answer is easily predictable. When neo-reactionary intelligence perceives this shambling wreckage of all cognitive integrity, it recoils into itself in utter revulsion. Everything it abominated about the libertarian delusion stands before it, trickling pitifully. This is the perfect caricature of its abandoned errors, an oozing swipeless mass of unreflective universalism. It's classical liberalism revived as an undead decay plague. If Carl wants to go after this thing with a shotgun, I don't see anyone holding him back. The view from the unlibertarianized left is illuminating. The conscience of a Lindsay-an libertarian is pretty darn liberal, with some policy disputes on top. When Lindsay stands with conservatives, it is mostly on somewhat accidental, but not therefore inconsiderable, policy grounds. He thinks liberals tend to adopt self-defeating policies. When Lindsay stands with liberals, it is mostly on philosophical grounds. This point fits in with the one I made in this post, about different sorts of libertarians, basically liberal or basically feudal. If you are a feudal libertarian, you really shouldn't have a problem with Jim Crow, in principle. If you are a liberal libertarian, you should. Conservative libertarians tend to be on the fence, feudalism/liberalism wise. This depends partly on a cheeky use of feudal-see my post. But, then again, what was Edmund Burke? A guy who was torn between liberalism and feudalism. That's not such a bad sketch of his personality type. Strangely, we're still talking about Jim Crow, as if the entire meaning of American history is expressed through that. The target here is Barry Goldwater, but it makes no substantial difference if Ron Paul is substituted. The critical point, in both cases, is that a reluctance to countenance the expansion of the political sphere in pursuit of racial egalitarianism is interpreted as a moral scandal, for which an ostentatious sacrifice of liberty is the only permissible solution. Negligence is already feudalism. When this dam bursts into libertarian compromise, the micromanagerial state has already been granted everything it will need to ask for. Stamping out feudalism makes you free. It works like this. If it wasn't for Hoppe, it would perhaps be understandable if the shuddering neo-reactionary, and were to suspect that libertarian thought, L0, tends, slowly but inevitably, to compost down towards this libertarian, L1, Walker, in which all the degenerative forces of conformism and revolt have been compacted, as if by some ideological parody of providence. Is not our libertarian zombie the still recognizable avatar of the old liberalism, resurrected hideously as the animated putrescence of the new? Yet we have Hoppe, and so we know that the directives of self-coordinating liberty need not take this path. There is, unmistakably, something other to libertarianism than what is seen in the figure of its zombified, libertarian ruin. Through a type of negative political theology, we can formulate it. L0 minus L1 equals N. First, identify every specifically emphatic feature of libertarianism, then subtract it without residue from the old Austro-libertarian matrix, and what remains is the neo-reactionary template, abstracted due to the provisional, negative, placeholders for yet undeveloped topics, presumed non-equality, non-universality, non-progress, in socio-cultural matters, and at least partial non-autonomy, of the economic agent from fragile structures of civility. Slaying the zombie does not, in itself, fill these gaps, but it holds open the gaps, and therefore the avenues of neo-reactionary exploration. As a rule of thumb, whatever Will Wilkinson is having, I'll have the opposite. If the libertarian innovation is conceived as a vector, its exact negation sets the neo-reactionary course. With this conclusion, science is served. We can return the corpse of a misconceived progressive liberty to its grave, or rather, to the cyclopean mausoleum it has made for itself, the liberal superstate which protects freedom in detail, with unbounded attentiveness, until it has been obliterated entirely from the earth.